Hey folks, Matthew Weiss here, WeissAdvice.com. Welcome to the Monday show where I go through a mix that I did or a recording that I did and explain the thought process as well as some of the techniques involved. This one is Enjoy That by Akon. It's actually an older mix. It's about 3.5, maybe even 4 years old, but the record actually just released last week. Funny how that works sometimes. So I thought that this would be a really cool one to show since it's relevant, just got picked up by radio, and making its way through the clubs. All right, so what I want to do is start by playing a little bit of where the record came in at. So I've taken all of my effects off, I've bypassed them, and we're going to hear just the raw files.
So I have a life like mine if you don't take time to enjoy that shit. So I have a life like mine if you don't take time to enjoy that shit. Nigga, I got Rarries, I got booze, dripping in designer clothes. I got way too many women, it's like any minded move. I've been taking way too many chances, fucking with no clue. I've been jumping out the window lately, yeah, you're on a move. Nigga, I got...
So in general, I think everything sounds pretty good. The production was done by Metro Boomin. He's really good. He usually sends out 2 tracks because he likes things to sound a very specific way. Khan's vocal is well recorded. I would say that in terms of the things that are working, we've got good dynamics, we've got a very clear vision for what this record should sound like and for what it should be, and overall, everything is kind of where it needs to be. The things that need to be improved, mainly it's just that there's 2 little things. Well, one little thing, one big thing. The little thing is that it feels like it was made on a very big speaker system, the way the subs are sitting versus the way the mids are sitting. So I think that we need to do some technical stuff in order to get the translation to be a little bit better. And also, I would say that the vocals feel very separate from the beat. And I want the vocals to feel more connected and feel like it was more one concrete vision. So I want to tackle the easier thing first. I think that we can get the translation going pretty simply. There's just a few very minor things that are really going to improve that. So let's listen to just the instrumental a little bit. So what kind of gives it away that these were made on big speakers is that big speakers tend to have really good sub excursion, so it's very satisfying to hear very low notes, and we have these very deep tones in the kick and the 808. The other thing that kind of gives it away is that larger speakers, generally speaking, tend to have some pinch in the upper mids that exaggerates snares and claps, and the snares and claps feel a little receded on my near fields. So the first thing that I want to do is just get some of that mid-range stuff to snap a little bit more. So I'm using a multiband transient designer. This in general is not a bad tool anyway because opening up those dynamics kind of will help the vocal sit in a little bit more. Although Metro stuff is already very punchy, it doesn't need a lot. But this is going to help any kind of laptop or small speaker playback system just have a little bit more bite in those upper frequency drums. And then this is an oddly specific one. All I'm doing is boosting up a little bit of mid-range on the left side. It sounded to me like it was a little right-leaning in the mids, so that's all that this is. But we don't have to worry about that. That's very specific to this. Okay, so the next thing that I've got going is some work on the 2 bus here, and this is where the rest of the translation is happening. So there's 3 main things that I'm doing. The first is that I'm boosting up a little bit of 250 hertz. This is going to be the upper bound of the bass range / where the bass meets the low mids, and this frequency is going to translate a little bit better on like phones, laptops, and kind of help things along in a car where sometimes we get a little bit of separation between the bass and the mids. So this is going to kind of help it just kind of bump a little bit on some other systems. And then I'm also doing some parallel limiting, which is a very uncommon technique, but it's the record is so open that if we hear it in playback systems that are noisy, like clubs or, cars if you're driving on the highway, the noise is going to start to compete with the open dynamics. So this is really designed to make the overall record feel fuller and more consistent. on those kinds of environments. And then lastly, if you happen to be listening on headphones, it wasn't quite satisfying enough in the side-to-side relationship, so a little bit of mid-side boosting of the sides happening there just for the headphone listeners to get a little bit more out of it. And I'll give you the before and after. So as soon as I turned that on, if you were listening on any kind of smaller speaker devices or anything like that, it should have been very readily apparent. It should have sounded like I just turned the level of everything up like 2 or 3 dB. In reality, it's actually sitting at the same peak level, but the perception of those frequencies tells us that it's now louder. So all of those smaller systems, we get better translation. The one thing that I noticed when I did this is that because of that parallel limiting, we lose a little bit of the bounce of the drums. So in order to get that back, I'm using FG Bomber, which is another type of transient designer, and this is going to just bring a little bit of bounce and groove back into the drums. Particularly listen to the dynamic of like the hi-hats and the snap on the snare. So like the leading edge of the kick, the little bit of snap on the snare, the dynamic of the hi-hat all just kind of sparks to life a little bit, and I really love this plugin in general. I did a whole video on it because I use it a lot. And that takes care of the instrumental bed. Really that simple, because Metro is just on top of his stuff. He really knows his own sound. He's got an engineer that he works with too, who's probably filling in a lot of the gaps. So it's very easy and makes my life super simple. Now let's take a look at the vocals, because this is probably the more difficult side of things. With the vocals, we have this weird kind of karaoke effect going on, because we hear the 2-track with this very big ethereal space coming from the sample, and then we've got Akon, who clearly sounds like he's in a booth.
Nigga, I got Rarers, I got booze, dripping in designer clothes. I got way too many women, it's like any minded move. I've been taking way too many chances, fucking with no cool.
So it's actually a pretty good capture, but it's maybe a little bit on the dull side, and there's maybe a little bit too much low-mid body for what we're trying to do with this record. I actually think that I could frame this record if I had all the track outs where that low-mid presence could stay in, and I could make the kick and that sample kind of like form with it and keep that. But as is, I don't really have that kind of access, so I think it's easier to kind of cut down some of that mid-range, that low mid-range energy to help seat the vocal in the track. And that's most of what's going to happen here. So the main plugin that's going to be doing the work is a channel strip. This vocal was recorded pretty much straight in. There wasn't really any EQ or compression. I didn't do the recording, but I can tell that it was kind of a straight-in recording. Normally when I'm recording, I try to get a very committed sound, so this channel strip is kind of emulating how I would have recorded the vocal if I had been setting it up. So I do record through EQ, I do record through compression, because I don't want to have to do this stuff later if I can avoid it. Here we've got a little bit of saturation coming from this middle section right here. This is an SSL emulation. And then if we take a look at this EQ, I'm doing a little bit of a boost around the 3K range just to kind of sharpen the vocal up, make it not quite so like dark and receded, but most of the bump that we're going to hear is actually coming from these mid-range cuts. I'm taking away a little bit of energy around 600 hertz. I'm taking away a fair amount of energy actually at around 100 hertz, and then I'm giving it a little bit of compression to kind of just squeeze glue everything together, and the end result is going to be something where it feels like I've boosted the top end with like the best top end EQ you've ever heard, but the real secret is that I've actually kind of opened up the low end and then gained the volume up after. So I'll give you the before and after real quick.
Nigga, I got Rarers, I got booze, dripping in designer clothes. I got way too many women, it's like any minded move. I've been taking way too many chances, fucking with no cool. I've been jumping out the window lately, yeah, Geronimo. Nigga.
So now you might have heard the vocals seem to kind of recede, like it immediately thinned, and you kind of hear that loss of mid-range. But now let's just listen to it without doing an immediate comparison and listen to how it sits in comparison to the actual beat.
Nigga, I got Rarers, I got booze, dripping in designer clothes. I got way too many women, it's like any minded move. I've been taking way too many chances,
It doesn't feel nearly as thin when we hear it when we hear it without that like immediate before and after comparison. And on top of that, because we've removed a lot of those sort of lower room tones, those tight room tones, it no longer feels like it's got a space on top of a space. So that's the bulk of the work. Everything else is really just small changes from there. There's a mid-range resonance that was happening, I guess it's 600, so I notched that out. Then after that, I wanted to make sure. Sometimes the low end felt like it was still blooming out too much, but I didn't want to take out any more lows, because if I took out any more lows, it would start to get too thin. So I'm using a little bit of multiband compression between 100 and 200 hertz kind of range. And then we've got a little bit of saturation and compression on the back end of this to kind of make up for the stuff that we're taking away. So I'll play the before and then I'll throw those plugins on after, and you'll hear that even though everything seems to tighten up, we don't lose any energy, we actually gain energy.
Nigga, I got Rarries, I got booze, dripping in designer clothes. I got way too many women, it's like any minded move.
Okay, now with all that stuff.
Nigga, I got Rarries, I got booze, dripping in designer clothes. I got way too many women, it's like any minded move. I've been taking way too many chances, fucking with no cool.
So I'm making the vocals smaller and smaller so that it's fitting into the beat, but I'm doing it in a way where we don't feel like we're necessarily losing anything. I did feel like the low mids were starting to get a little bit anemic, and this is a really nice compressor for kind of bringing low mid energy into a sound without actually boosting low mids back. So we kind of get a little bit of that energy back, and sometimes it's nice just to kind of like just grab RVox and put some squeeze on a vocal and see if it does something that we like or that we don't like. And I find a lot of times, even if I have a really nicely dynamically controlled vocal that feels pretty finished, putting a little bit of squeeze on it at the end kind of can give it a little bit of attitude and energy that makes it feel pretty nice. So that and a de-esser, and we end up with this.
Nigga, I got Rarries, I got booze, dripping in designer clothes. I got way too many women, it's like any minded move. I've been taking way too many chances for.
So without.
Nigga, I got Rarries, I got booze, dripping in designer clothes. I got way too many women, it's like any minded move.
And with.
Nigga, I got Rarries, I got booze, dripping in designer clothes. I got way too many women, it's like any minded move. I've been taking way too many chances for.
So now we end up with something that's a lot smoother. It blends with the beat a lot better. It feels like it sits inside the beat, but still has a sense of dimension. So I feel like this is a really good dry treatment. And one of the things that I typically strive for is getting a really solid dimensional vocal even before I get any kind of reverbs or delays going. There has to still be a sense of three-dimensionality, and if I've lost that three-dimensionality, I've probably overscooped some of the mids or something like that. But I feel like this is already in a really good place, and now we can start building an ambience in order to create the full sound of the vocal. In this particular record, I feel like the sound of the vocal is going to highly depend on the ambience. So this is a really important inflection point in the decision-making process, and I want to emphasize this. I'm going to play a little bit of this down, and I'm going to give two examples of different paths I could go, both of which would be legitimate, and then explain the one that I took.
Nigga, I got Rarries, I got booze, dripping in designer clothes. I got way too many women, it's like any minded move. I've been taking way too many chances, fucking with no cool. I've been jumping out the window lately, yeah, Geronimo.
So I've got two kind of opposing ideas. I've got these very gritty, dry drums, and then I've got this very ambient, vocally kind of choirish, weird voice sample thing that's just caked in reverb. And they're very, very different. They contrast very hard, which I think is great. I could either take the vocal in the direction that the drums are sort of leading things and go for something that's like really raw and gritty, and I think there's a lot of merit to going that approach. Or I could take the cue from the vocal sample where there's like a lot of reverb and a chorusy, modulated, weird ethereal quality and kind of incorporate that into the vocal and make that the style of the sound. And ultimately I went with the latter. I decided I wanted to blend it with the sample, and I chose it for that for a few reasons. The first is that because this record is a little down-tempo and because Khan's lyrics are not super fast. It's not like a Bone Thugs kind of thing going on here. It's a little more steady paced, that the more intrigue I could get from the sound and the more energy I could get from the sound design, the better I'd be able to keep the listener's attention with it. So there's just that sort of practical side of going with something a little bit more ambient. And also because I know that Con tends to like ambiences. R&B in general tends to favor reverbs and delays and having a fair amount of them. Stylistically, that just seemed like the way to go. If this was more of like a rap lyric on this, I would probably consider mixing it with the drums a little bit more and keeping my ambiences pretty tight, or maybe even not use any kind of reverbs or delays or anything like that. Just really dry and emphasize on making the dry sound stylized and working and blending very well with the drums. But we went with the more reverby sound. Here's what I did. The first thing that I had to do is I had to choose a primary reverb that would reflect the sound that I wanted. And I want the vocal, Con's vocal, to blend with that sample. I want it to make sense with it. So if we listen to just the sample without Con there.
Nigga, I got Rarries, I got booze, dripping.
There's this very colorful, very realistic space, but very colorful quality to it. A sort of modular, weird spread that it's kind of hard to put a finger on what reality we're living in with it. So I kind of wanted to emulate that. So I decided to go with a very colorful, modulated plate sound. And it ends up sounding like this. And I'll play it even without the vocals so we can really hear it. And you can hear outside of this sort of like the auto-tune quality that's creating that kind of robotic upper mid and a little bit of metal sound in the top end, especially like the mids to low mids of that reverb blend really nicely with the sample. They feel very connected. So that's why I ultimately chose this reverb. I felt like it was meshing with what was already there, the idea that was already there. So
Nigga, I got Rarries, I got booze, dripping in designer clothes. I got way too many women, it's like any mighty move. I've been taken way too many.
From there, I kind of felt like the vocal ended up feeling a little too forward still, like it felt a little too direct. So I actually ended up EQing it after I started building the ambiences in order to sit the vocal inside of the reverb and inside of the track even a little bit more.
Nigga, I got Rarries, I got booze, dripping in designer clothes. I got way too many women, it's like any mighty move.
And I think at this point, we already sort of see the vision starting to come together. So now it's just a little bits of spice to give it that extra bit of seasoning and really emphasize the overall sound. But even just leaving it at this wouldn't have been bad. So now the next thing that I want to do is kind of acknowledge the width of the record. That vocal sample spreads across the entire stereo field. I kind of want our main vocal to do the same. So the first thing that I'm doing is I'm incorporating a ping pong delay with a little bit of chorusing on it. So it's just H delay here with the tops and bottoms filtered, doing a quarter note ping pong with this little lo-fi for grit and fun, and then a little bit of chorusing on it as well, very little bit, but just to kind of match it to the tone of this like very modulated sample.
Nigga, I got Rarries, I got booze, dripping in designer clothes. I got way too many women, it's like any mighty move.
And so you don't even really hear the delay until I stop the record and we hear the delay tail echo on, because it's not really meant to be so much heard as it's meant to be felt. Sometimes these are called like ghost delays, or at least I've called them ghost delays. So that's my first step in kind of spreading the vocal out. My next step is kind of leaning into that modulated quality that the sample has. So I have not one, but two modulation devices here. I have a flanger, and this is just the stock Pro Tools flanger. It's nothing crazy. And then I have a chorus effect as well. And I'll pull those up just so we can kind of hear them. But the flanger sounds like this, and the chorus sounds like this.
Nigga, I got Rarries, I got booze, dripping in designer clothes. I got way too many women, it's like any mighty move. I've been taken with.
So very, very modulated sound. Now, it's not nearly that pronounced. I have it turned down a lot lower. It's just to give it that sort of spread, comb filtery kind of feel.
Nigga, I got Rarries, I got booze, dripping in designer clothes. I got way too many women, it's like any money move. I've been taking with.
And then lastly, I have another reverb that's tucked underneath the main reverb, which kind of has this way of complicating the sound, giving us a little bit more energy at the very front, and then allowing that more distant reverb, the longer reverb, to kind of spread in the background. It's a way of kind of creating the illusion of more reverb without having so much more reverb. And then also, because they're both time-based effects, they modulate with each other again, so we get a little bit more of that chorusing, ethereal quality. And with that in, I'll turn it way up so that we hear it as we're doing playback, but it's also automated.
Nigga, I got Rarries, I got booze, dripping in designer clothes. I got way too many women, it's like any money move. I've been taking way too many chances, fucking with no cool. I've been jumping out the window lately, yeah.
We don't really hear it when it's low. I turned it up, obviously, so we could hear it, but it ends up being kind of like a medium room, almost sounds like a locker room kind of a sound. There's a lot of like really ugly resonances. It's kind of a gritty, gross sounding reverb. It doesn't sound good on its own, but when it's tucked underneath this like really pretty, like colorful plate, it adds that sort of sense of grit. Like it gives me that image of like a lot of like black and green, like from like an old Batman movie or film noir or something like that. So it's giving me that sensibility, and I have it automated to come way up on the chorus because I really wanted to bring that sort of gritty sense out specifically on the chorus.
So I have a life like mine, if you don't take time to enjoy that shit. So I have a life like mine, if you don't take time to enjoy that shit.
The chorus is kind of interesting because it's like an anti-chorus. All the drums drop out, the vocal becomes a lot more sparse, so I kind of made it my mission to like pack as much reverb, delay, and chorus as possible into this vocal. So on the chorus, we actually have an eighth note, as well, an eighth note delay, as well as some chorusing and some reverb going into all of the vocal effects processing as inserts, which is not something I typically do, but in this particular case, I really wanted to create the ambience as part of the sound. And so all these ambiences also end up feeding all the other ambiences, and we get this very like bizarre, surreal noise. But because we have so much space in the record, in the chorus, it actually kind of works. It's one of the few times where this sort of approach will actually work well in a record.
So I have a life like mine, if you don't take time to enjoy that shit. So I have a life like mine, if you don't take time to enjoy that shit.
And then lastly, I have a delay throw just on the name of the song, which is Enjoy That Shit. So I figured, let's echo it out. It's the tag of the song, it's the title, plus we've got all this space to fill up. Let's go.
So I have a life like mine, if you don't take time to enjoy that shit. So I have a life like mine, if you don't take time to enjoy that shit. Nigga, I got Rarries, I got booze, dripping in designer clothes. I got way too many women, it's like any money move.
And then we also get that nice little bit of contrast where we have this super ethereal, weird, dreamy chorus, and then it actually tightens up, even though there's still quite a bit of ambience on the vocal. It gets this noticeable tightening when the actual verse kicks in and we get the punchier drums and everything like that, so a little bit more contrast. This is an older mix, so I think if I were to do things differently, I would probably, make that contrast even a little bit more extreme. I would have probably taken more time to stylize the reverbs and delays to create a much more complicated sound, and also one that could fit a lot more energy with some EQ by carving around the vocal and things like that. And I think I would have also taken a little bit more time with like maybe some one-time events. The beat itself kind of is a bunch of loops, and the loops, there's really only 3 loops happening. So I think some more kind of like drops, filters, reverse sounds, one-time delay throws, strange effects. I'm not really sure what I would necessarily do, but just taking times to kind of like punctuate certain moments maybe would have been something that I would do now. Anyway, if you dig this video, hit that like button. If you want to catch more videos like this, hit subscribe with the bell notification. This record is out. You can hear the final mix. I'll put a link in the description below. And lastly, you know what we say. We are musicians. Sound is our instrument. And I will catch you next time.